welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. The 19th chapter of Genesis tells us of Lot's misadventures in Sodom, which little city has become a metaphor of wicked behavior. The story is that Lot separated from Abraham, his uncle, choosing to live in the fertile plains of the region they occupied together, while he left to his uncle the rugged and forbidding mountainsides for sustenance of his flocks. By degrees, Lot was drawn into Sodom and became enmeshed in the wickedness carried out there, until at last God decreed the destruction of the city and sent angels to warn Lot to leave it. So we join him now in the early morning light on the edge of the city. He who had taken advantage of his uncle and sacrificed his integrity for money and ease now stands with his wife and 2 daughters in a forlorn little group, homeless, friendless, stripped of everything, shivering outside the gate in the cold morning air, met with a stern divine command, "Escape for thy life." Here for the first time the direction of Lot's escape is pointed out, and he is commanded to avoid the lands which first enticed him toward Sodom's embrace. Only in the mountains which he had once disdained is there safety. But Lot, who had been so careless of eschewing the degraded society of Sodom, is even in the face of his present peril so remote from following God, so heedless of his instructions, as to challenge God to his face in his newfound terror of impending doom by declaring that even though he had received mercy in being delivered to this point, he could not carry out what God was calling him to do. Now that he is convinced impending judgment is coming to Sodom, he fears its evil shall overtake him even in the place to which he was instructed to flee, and so he asks permission instead to go to Zoar, another nearby city. When a man has been cleaving to this fleeting life of earthly good wakes up to believe his danger, as we sometimes do when looking in the face of death, he is likely to plunge into an abyss of terror in which God's commands seem impossible and his will to save becomes dim. In the same manner, the devil first lies to us by saying, "You're quite safe where you are, don't be in a hurry to go." Then he lies, "You can never get away now." But God's instructions to any needy soul of how to escape are promises that we can escape. God answered the cry, whatever its fault. He hears even an imperfect petition and can see the tiniest seed of faith buried under thick clouds of doubt and fear. God answered that he could not destroy Sodom until Lot was safe. He cannot, answers Lot's cannot. His power was limited by his own solemn promise to save his faltering servant. The latter had feared that before he could reach the mountain, the evil would overtake him. God showed him that his safety was a condition precedent to this outburst. Lot barred the way. God gave him the awful command to make haste, as if he were weary of delay and were more than ready to smite. May this remind us, when the world has long been groaning under some giant evil, and the bitter seed is grown up into a waving forest of poison, there is something in the righteousness of God which will brook no longer delay. Genesis 29, Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and on Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. This passage is the first and only major communication recorded between Lot and God. It was Abraham who received the divine revelation to leave home and hearth for a city whose builder and maker was God. And yet the Lord's presence was so convicting, Lot had no doubt of its authenticity. God's mercy to Abraham, coupled with Abraham's graciousness to Lot, had led to this opportunity to warm in the reflected sunlight. His selfishness and greed had nearly destroyed him. Well, let's learn from that example. Oh, and while you're at it, have you talked to God today?
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.